Welcome, brave souls, to a journey into the shadows of one of New England's most infamous places, the Lizzie Borden House. A place where history and mystery intertwine, where the walls seem to hold secrets too dark to speak aloud. Tonight, I invite you to step inside with me, to listen closely to whispers from the past, to feel the chill that lingers in the air, and to question what's real and what's beyond our understanding. Are you ready to uncover the stories that refuse to die? Then brace yourself, because what you're about to hear may haunt you long after the lights go out. One. An unforgettable night at the Lizzie Borden House. Fall River, Massachusetts. A young woman named Clara booked a one-night stay at the Lizzie Borden House, driven by her curiosity about the bloody mystery that has haunted the home since 1892. She knew the story. Andrew and Abby Borden were found brutally murdered inside the house, and their daughter, Lizzie Borden, was accused but acquitted of the crime. Today, the house has become both a museum and an inn for those brave enough to test their courage. Clara arrived in the late afternoon, greeted by an intimidating silence. The walls of the house still retain many original elements, including Victorian-era furniture and decorations. She stayed in Abby Borden's bedroom, the very room where Lizzie's stepmother was found dead. During the tour, the guide warned her, "Some guests have heard a woman weeping, seen shadows in the mirror, and doors opening on their own. But only if they're disrespectful to the spirits who still live here." That night, Clara tried to sleep with soft music playing on her phone to calm herself. But at exactly 2:13 a.m., the music suddenly stopped. Her phone died completely. Then she heard footsteps downstairs, even though she was the only guest in the house that night. The footsteps slowly climbed the stairs, one by one, until they stopped right outside her door. Clara held her breath, eyes wide open, staring at the door. No sound, just horrifying silence. Suddenly the doorknob turned, but the door was locked. Silence. Then came a soft whisper, a woman's voice. Clara couldn't make out the words, but the tone was either regretful or angry. The whisper ended with the sound of heavy breathing in her left ear, though no one else was in the room. Terrified, Clara turned on her flashlight. No one was there. She forced herself to open the door and look down the hallway. It was empty, but the air felt colder than before. As she turned back to her bed, she screamed. The old mirror in the corner reflected the image of a pale woman in a white gown standing right behind her, emotionless. The figure slowly faded as Clara felt the air grow heavier and her chest tighten. She spent the rest of the night with every light on, huddled in a corner until morning finally arrived. The next day, the staff told her calmly, "You're lucky. Most guests in that room are woken up by Abby's screams." Clara left the house shaking and never returned again. 2. The scream in the attic room. A young couple from Connecticut, Mason and Eliza, booked a two-night stay at the Lizzie Borden House to experience the atmosphere of America's most haunted home. They chose to sleep in the attic bedroom, once the room of the housemaid, Bridget Sullivan, who had claimed to be napping there on the day the murders occurred. The first night passed quietly, though the air remained cold and unnervingly still. But on the second night, exactly at 3 a.m., Mason was awakened by the sound of something heavy crashing onto the floor downstairs. At first, he assumed it was just the old house creaking under the cold air. But then a woman's scream, sharp, high-pitched, and filled with terror, came from the direction of the kitchen. Eliza also woke up. They stared at each other in the dark, their hearts pounding. Thinking it might be another guest or a staff member in distress, they decided to go downstairs. But when they reached the lower floor, the house was empty. The lights were out. The air had suddenly taken on the metallic scent of old iron, like rusted blood. As they stepped into the dining room, Eliza froze. She pointed toward the old wooden table. Faintly, red stains appeared to form strange patterns resembling blood. But when Mason turned on his phone flashlight, the stains vanished. Suddenly, the kitchen door slammed shut by itself. From behind it came a high-pitched woman's voice. "Don't look at me, don't look at me." They ran upstairs in panic. But once they reached the attic, Mason felt something invisible push hard against his back. He was shoved into the wall. While Eliza screamed, she saw the shadow of an old woman standing in the corner of the room, her body pale as a corpse and her eyes entirely black. The figure spoke softly, yet with piercing clarity, "She is still here. She never left." Everything went black after that. Mason and Eliza woke up the next morning in their bed, covered in dust, their heads throbbing as if they had been struck. When they went down to the lobby to report what had happened, the staff only whispered in return, "The attic room is the one they hate visitors entering the most." 3. The last recording. The man's name was Nathan Cray. He was a horror investigation YouTuber who visited haunted locations across America. When he arrived at the Lizzie Borden house at the end of autumn, he brought an infrared camera, an EMF detector, electromagnetic field meter, and a digital voice recorder. He booked a night alone in the house with permission to record everything. He deliberately chose the room where Andrew Borden was found dead on the sofa. His face struck more than 10 times with an axe. At 10 p.m., Nathan began filming. He spoke to the camera, explaining the history of the house and the murders that occurred on the morning of August 4, 1892. Everything went smoothly until 1 a.m., when his EMF device suddenly emitted a loud beep, signaling a surge of unseen energy. Instantly, the room's lights dimmed, and the temperature dropped sharply even though the heater was on. Nathan started an audio recording. He placed the recorder in the middle room and went upstairs. 5 minutes later, he returned, but the voice recorder was off. When he played back the short recording on his laptop, he heard something that took his breath away. The recording lasted only 27 seconds. But during those 27 seconds, a woman's restrained sobbing was heard, followed by a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." Then the sound of an axe slicing through the air, whack, 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 accompanied by the groan of an old man. Nathan tried to stay calm, though his body trembled. He said to his camera, "Okay, this is real. I'm not doubting anymore." But at 2:14 a.m., everything turned chaotic. His main camera fell off the tripod. The laptop shut down. The living room door slammed shut by itself. From behind the door, Nathan heard fast footsteps, like someone running barefoot back and forth. He locked himself in Andrew Borden's room. There, he tried to call someone, but there was no signal. Seconds later, he heard heavy breathing from behind the wardrobe. He turned on his flashlight and slowly opened the wardrobe door. Empty. However, when he turned toward the bed, he saw an outline on the blanket, as if someone had been sitting there, but no one was present. His infrared camera, which had turned on again, recorded for 13 seconds a figure resembling a woman standing behind Nathan, then vanishing instantly. The next morning, Nathan left the house without breakfast, his face pale and voice trembling. 4. Ivy's sleepover friend. This story comes from a woman named Helen Moore, who stayed at the Lizzie Borden house in the summer of 2013 with her husband and their 6-year-old daughter, Ivy. They stayed in the guest room on the second floor, the very room where Abby Borden, Lizzie's stepmother, was found dead with axe wounds to her head, her body lying face down near the bed. That night, they relaxed in the room, telling stories and reading children's books to Ivy before bedtime. Ivy was cheerful as usual, and nothing seemed strange when the lights went out. But around 2:45 a.m., Helen woke up to Ivy murmuring to herself. She thought her daughter was sleep-talking, but when she lifted her head and looked toward the side of the bed, she was stunned. Ivy sat upright on her bed, staring into the dark corner of the room. Her smile was wide and her eyes bright. She murmured, "Her name's Mrs. A. She doesn't like me playing by the mirror. But she said I'm sweet." Helen immediately sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. Ivy slowly turned to her and said innocently, "Don't turn on the light, she'll get mad." Her husband, Eric, also woke and went over to their daughter. Ivy looked physically fine, but her skin was cold and her hands seemed drained of blood. They laid Ivy back down and held her close. But after that, the night was no longer peaceful. Minutes later, scratching sounds came from inside the closet. Not once but repeatedly, like nails scraping wood. Suddenly Ivy opened her eyes and whispered, "She's coming out, she's crawling." The room's lights suddenly went out, and the closet door creaked open slowly, making a long, piercing squeak. From inside came heavy breathing like someone gasping. Helen hugged Ivy tightly while Eric tried to open the bedroom door to escape, but it was locked from the inside, though there was no lock there. Ivy began to cry softly, not loudly, just quietly. "She's angry, Mom. She's angry because you disturbed her. She wants me to come." In fear and desperation, Helen recited prayers aloud while Eric tried to turn on the phone's flashlight. When the light came on, everything went silent. The closet door shut again. The bedroom door unlocked. The air returned to normal. The next day they checked out early. Ivy seemed healthy, but throughout the journey home she kept drawing a figure. A woman in a black dress, faceless, with long hands and sharp nails. She named her Mrs. A. In a letter Helen sent to the homeowner a week later, she wrote, "I'm not someone who believes in ghosts, but that night, we were not alone. And our daughter still talks about the woman in the mirror who wants to keep her company while she sleeps. 5. The Impossible Dream. His name was Kazuo Nakamura. He was a Japanese man in his early 30s traveling solo around the world. He claimed to love old buildings and had accidentally booked a room at the Lizzie Borden House through a travel app, without reading the house's history. He only saw it as an interesting old Victorian-style house. Kazuo stayed in the room that used to be Lizzie's own, now converted into a guest room for visitors wanting to experience the historic atmosphere. He arrived at the house around 5 p.m., greeted by the staff who gave him a brief tour. When asked if he knew who Lizzie Borden was, Kazuo just smiled and said, "No, just interesting house. Very old." He went to bed early that night, around 9 p.m., exhausted from his long journey. But exactly at 1:45 a.m., Kazuo woke up drenched in cold sweat. He had just experienced a dream so vivid, so real, it took his breath away. In the dream, he stood in the house's kitchen, but the setting was far different from the modern condition. Everything looked old, dull, and dark. He heard footsteps from upstairs. Then a young dark-haired woman came down carrying a small bloody axe. She didn't look at him, but Kazuo felt as if he was being watched. He then heard a scream from the living room, followed by the sound of a heavy object falling. Suddenly, he was in another room. An old woman stood with her back to him, facing the wall as if searching for something. When she turned, her face cracked like shattered porcelain and blood oozed out. She spoke in broken English. "She did it, but you watched, you didn't help?" Kazuo screamed and woke up. But what truly terrified him was, he found a small blood stain on the edge of his bedsheet, and he hadn't had a wet dream, wasn't injured, and hadn't had a nosebleed. The staff found nothing upon inspection the next morning. What made this story even stranger was when Kazuo returned to Boston and watched a documentary about the Lizzie Borden case on the hotel TV. He trembled as he realized everything he had seen in his dream, the young woman with the axe, the scream in the living room, the old woman standing facing the wall, all matched the descriptions of the 1892 murder. He immediately emailed the house management and asked, "Why did I dream about all this when I never knew the story before?" Their brief reply, "You're not the first. But what you saw may be the house's own memory." 6. The Voice in the Dining Room. This story comes from a woman named Mrs. Eleanor Grace, a 67-year-old retired history teacher from Maine. She stayed alone at the Lizzie Borden house on a quiet autumn night in 2019. Eleanor was a fan of American criminal history, and visiting Lizzie Borden's house had been her longtime dream. She chose to stay for 2 nights, specifically in the guest room where Abby Borden was murdered. But the most terrifying event for her didn't happen in the room, it happened during breakfast. Eleanor went down to the dining room around 7:30 a.m., earlier than the other guests. She sat alone in a chair near the fireplace, staring at an old painting of Lizzie hanging on the wall. She admitted feeling a bit creeped out by the painting's eyes, as if they were following her. But she calmed herself, thinking it was just her imagination. As she was brewing tea, she heard the soft scraping of a wooden chair at the far end of the table, like someone pulling out a chair and sitting down. She quickly looked around, but no one was there. She felt a little uneasy but stayed seated. Then she heard a voice, a woman's voice, faint, with an old New England accent. "Do you believe I did it?" Eleanor froze. The voice was very close, as if coming from beside the table. She thought maybe the house staff was joking or another guest had quietly entered. But when she looked again, there was no one. The dining room was empty and silent. The clock ticked slowly on the wall. "Everyone accused me. Even Father didn't believe me. But you, do you believe me?" The voice came again. This time very clear, like a whisper right into her ear. Eleanor tried to speak, "Who's there?" But her mouth wouldn't move. She felt her body freeze and a strange smell filled the air, the scent of iron, like old blood and damp cloth. Suddenly, her tea glass shattered on the table. The hot liquid spilled, making her scream. The house staff rushed in and helped Eleanor, who sat down weakly. They saw and heard nothing. No chair had moved, no sound, no one had entered the dining room before Eleanor. The next night, Eleanor didn't dare sleep in Abby's room. She moved downstairs and kept the lights on all night. Before leaving the house, she wrote in the guest book, "If that was truly Lizzie's voice, then she's still searching for someone who believes her. And she won't be silent until she's found." 7. The Woman at the Foot of the Bed. This terrifying story was experienced by a young couple from Rhode Island, Brandon and Alyssa Carmichael. They stayed at the Lizzie Borden house to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. Brandon, who loved all things true crime, saw the experience of staying in the infamous murder house as exciting and romantic. Alyssa, though hesitant, went along just to please her husband. They got a room upstairs, right above the living room where Lizzie's father was found bloodied and dead. The first night passed quietly, except for some faint footsteps on the wooden floor and a closet door opening by itself, which they attributed to the wind or old wood expanding. But the second night marked the beginning of a trauma they would never forget. At 2:36 a.m., Alyssa woke up feeling as if someone was watching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw the faint silhouette of a woman standing at the foot of their bed. The figure stood motionless, facing away from them. Her hair was long and loose, and her dress was a long white gown, like a nightgown from the 1800s. Alyssa thought it was a hallucination and tried to wake Brandon, but her body felt heavy as if pressed down. Eventually, Alyssa managed to speak. Brandon woke up and immediately looked toward the foot of the bed. His eyes widened. The figure was still there, silent, not moving at all. "Who are you?" Brandon shouted. But there was no reaction. Brandon tried to get up to turn on the light, but the switch on the wall didn't work. Their phone flashlight also wouldn't turn on, even though the battery had been full before sleeping. The room felt freezing cold. Their breath condensed in the air as if inside a refrigerator. Brandon then threw a pillow at the figure. The pillow fell to the floor, passing through empty air. The figure vanished instantly like mist. Suddenly the lights turned on by themselves. When they checked the door, the lock was still engaged from the inside. The windows were tightly closed. There was no way anyone else could have entered. The next morning, they moved to another hotel in town. Alyssa told the receptionist before leaving, "We want to believe it was just a nightmare. But we both saw it, and no dream can feel that real." A few weeks later, Brandon found an old photo of Abby Borden, Lizzie's stepmother, who died from an axe wound in the guest room. In the photo, Abby wore a white nightgown, her long hair loose. Exactly like the figure they saw that night. 8. The Whisper in the Mirror. This story comes from a man named Jacob Whitaker, an independent photographer from Connecticut who enjoys exploring haunted places. He came alone to the Lizzie Borden house in the winter of 2021 with the goal of creating a photo documentary project titled Remnants of Souls Across Time. He was allowed to rent the entire house for one full night to carry out his photo shoot. Jacob started his photo session from afternoon until night, capturing every corner of the house with an old film camera. He used small spotlights and several candles to create a classic atmosphere. He felt uneasy while shooting in the second-floor bathroom. The old mirror above the sink seemed to reflect a shadow that didn't match his body position. When he stood sideways, the reflection remained straight. He thought the mirror was flawed or dirty. But the peak experience happened at 1:17 a.m. Jacob was photographing himself using the timer, standing in front of the mirror in the guest room, where Abby Borden was killed. He wanted to capture his reflection as if sharing space with spirits of the past. He set up the camera, pressed the button, then stood still in front of the mirror, staring at his own shadow. 3 seconds later, a faint voice was heard, so soft like a whisper from behind the glass. "You look like Andrew?" Jacob was startled. He turned around, thinking the voice came from behind him. But no one was there. He was alone in the house. He looked back at the mirror. The mirror now reflected two figures. Himself, and someone to his left. A pale woman, her hair neatly curled, wearing a high-neck lace blouse and long skirt 1890s style. Her face was blank. Her eyes dark and lifeless. Jacob reflexively turned around. But in the real world there was no one. He looked back at the mirror. The figure was gone. But a white mist was left on the glass surface, as if someone had breathed from inside. He tried to take a photo, but his film camera suddenly jammed. While trying to fix it, he heard the soft voice again, this time closer. "If you stay here, you will join them." His spotlight went out. The small candle in the corner also went dark. The house was silent, chilling. Jacob felt a heavy pressure on his chest and his breath shortened, as if something unseen was pulling him. He ran out of the room, down the stairs without looking back. The next morning, he sent the film roll to a photo lab. Among dozens of photos, only one showed something strange. A picture of himself in front of the mirror, but with the shadow of another woman standing behind him. All other photos looked normal except for that one. The professional photographer at the lab confirmed, "There's no sign of editing, and this isn't a reflection or double exposure effect. That figure was really there." Jacob decided never to return to that house. He keeps that photo locked in a drawer, and admits he never dares to look into a mirror for too long again. 9. Playmate from the Upstairs. This story comes from a woman named Carol Mason, who stayed at the Lizzie Borden house with her husband, Peter, and their 5-year-old daughter, Emily. It was spring 2017. They never expected that the family weekend getaway they dreamed of would instead leave a lifelong, chilling memory. Carol was initially hesitant to bring Emily to stay at a place infamous for its brutal murder history. But Peter, a history enthusiast, reassured her that the house had since become a safe, clean, and child-friendly museum. They rented a room on the upper floor, right next to what used to be Lizzie Borden's private bedroom. The first night passed quietly. But starting the next morning, Emily began acting strangely. During breakfast in the dining room downstairs, Emily said innocently, "Last night I played with an older sister. Her name is Maggie." Carol and Peter exchanged confused glances. They knew there were no other guests that night and certainly no other children in the house. Peter asked, "Where does Sister Maggie live?" Emily replied while spooning cereal, "She lives in the attic. But she doesn't like coming down during the day. She said daytime hurts." Carol tried to smile, thinking it was just a child's imagination. But while they were touring the house, a museum staff member overheard the name and looked startled. She said, "Maggie, that's the nickname of Bridget Sullivan the Borden family's maid at the time of the murders." This made the atmosphere uneasy. But the peak incident happened on the second night. Carol woke around 2 a.m. because she heard soft laughter, a child's voice. She looked to the side of the bed and saw Emily sitting on the carpet facing an old wardrobe. Emily giggled and nodded occasionally as if talking to someone. Carol got out of bed, quietly calling her daughter. "Emily, what are you doing?" Emily replied without turning around, "Maggie is teaching me hide and seek. She said I have to hide when the lights go out." Before Carol could respond, the room's lights suddenly went out. Total darkness. Emily vanished from sight. Panicked, Carol fumbled to find the switch. When the lights finally came back on seconds later, Emily was gone from the carpet, nowhere under the bed, not in the bathroom either. Peter woke and joined the search. They shouted, calling their daughter, almost hysterical. 5 minutes later, they found Emily standing still in the open attic, its door mysteriously ajar. She was facing a dark corner, speaking softly. Carol immediately pulled her daughter back. Emily only said, "She doesn't like Mom getting angry. She said Mom must not disturb us." They packed their things right away and left the house in the middle of the night. After that incident, for weeks Emily kept talking about Maggie, as if she still heard her voice. She even once wrote a message on paper, something she had never been taught. "Upstairs there is always someone waiting. They want to play forever." The voice from inside the closet. The following story comes from a guest named Alex Granger, a software engineer from Maine who stayed at the Lizzie Borden house in October 2020 with his girlfriend, Lisa. They were drawn to try the experience of staying in the scariest place in New England because Alex is a fan of mystery stories and urban legends. They deliberately booked the Abby Borden room, the tragic place where Lizzie's stepmother was found dead, to feel the darkest atmosphere of the house. At first, the atmosphere felt normal. Alex noted that the house had a coldness that never went away, even when the heater was on. They spent the first night wandering around and recording footage for personal documentation. They experienced no disturbances. But on the second night, Lisa began complaining about strange sounds. At exactly 2:45 a.m., she woke up because she heard a voice whispering her name from inside the closet. "Lisa. Lisa." Alex didn't believe it at first. But when he paused and approached the old wardrobe in the corner of the room, he heard it himself, the soft scraping sound, like fingernails scratching the inside of the wood. He slowly opened the closet door. It was dark and empty. But the smell of rusty iron and camphor was strong, like an old wardrobe that hadn't been opened for a long time. At the back of the closet, there was a dark reddish stain on the wood, a stain that hadn't been there the first night. After returning to bed, they began to hear soft footsteps upstairs. The problem was there was no floor above that room. Just a small locked attic that was unused. Lisa insisted they leave. But Alex, curious, placed his phone inside the closet set to record audio all night. He wanted to prove there was nothing there. The next morning he played back the recording. For the first several minutes, only soft snoring could be heard. But at the 47th minute, there was a sound like heavy breathing very close to the microphone. Then an old woman's voice with an old English accent said, "Please, I'm locked in here." And right after that, a loud noise, like someone pounding on the inside of the closet. 3 knocks. Alex immediately deleted the recording and erased the backup copy from his laptop. A week after returning home, Lisa began having recurring dreams. In her dream, she stood before the same closet, hearing someone crying inside. When she opened the door, it wasn't a human who emerged, but a gray shadow that absorbed the surrounding light. To this day, Lisa admits she cannot look at the wardrobe in her home for too long without feeling as if something is watching her from inside. Thank you for listening to these chilling tales from the Lizzie Borden House, a home that holds not only a dark history but also an energy that seems never to have left. Behind its aged walls, every hallway and room still whispers, for those brave enough to listen. Is it all just suggestion? Or do the spirits of the past truly still reside there? Only those who have spent the night in that place know the answer. Until we meet again in the next horror story, and remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't what you see, but what hides in the dark.